Hello, my name is Ethan, and today I'll be talking about variables and typecasting, which is part of day 3. Alright, so what are data and data types? So, data is basically just information. Like, if you think about data, you think about just information and like anything that can be considered info, like an item or like a fact or like a number, right? Or your address, that's all data. It's all considered data. So in Python, there's also data, and it's referred to as data types, and there are many different types of data. So for example, here we have the number 42, and we have the word hello. In Python, these are two different data types, which I'll be going over here. So here are some basic data types. There's the integer, which is called int when you type in Python, and they are just basically whole numbers such as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 100, 3, and 20. They're all integers. And that number 42 before was an integer. So what's a floating point? Which is called float in Python. So float describes decimal numbers such as 99.5, 2.25, and 3.0. So as you can see, 3.0 is a decimal number as well. If you put float in front of a number, or you just write out 3.0, it'll change it to always having a decimal point, even though it's an integer. It'll have a decimal point after if you convert it to a float data type. So a string, which is str for as short in Python, it's a sequence of characters like the word hello. Those are five letters, HELLO, and five is also considered a character, as well as aren't. Aren't is a word and it's consisted of these characters. So basically, if you were to type on your keyboard, those are all basically the characters that you can use in a string, and you have to put them in quotation marks. So what's a Boolean, or BOOL for as short in Python? It's basically just true and false, so it's a Boolean value. It has two data types. It's a data type, but you can only store two values in it, true or false. So, but you might be wondering, what do you store data types in? Well, variables are what you can store data in. So you can always store data into a variable by writing the name of your variable equals and then whatever you want to contain in your variable. It could be like a float, or it could be an integer, it could be a string, it could be a Boolean value, it can be whatever data type you want. So there are some naming rules when it comes to variables, such as it can't have any spaces in it, and it has to be camel case. And basically, camel case, well, it doesn't have to be camel case, but it's just like the conventional way of naming variables. You want to have a lowercase, and then you want to have the next word to be uppercase, and the words following also to be uppercase. And it also can't start with a number or symbol, and it can't be a Python keyword. And if it's a Python keyword, you can tell because it'll become a different color in your IDE. So let's test that out here. So if I were to write the variable, let's say x variable equals 5. That's a variable. It works. Let's print it out to see if it works. So this is how you print it out. You can just store that data into a variable, and you can use that variable in your code. So here. And what's so good about variables is you can change it as you go on, but I'll talk about that in a bit. So as you can see, we can print out 5. But if we name it something like if, as you can see, it's highlighted a different color, you get an error. It's just a syntax error, and it thinks it's an if statement, but it's actually not. So also, if you were to name it with a space, like var x, right? Let's see what happens. So you can see it's also invalid syntax because there's a space and it thinks that x is the variable and it has this var in front of it, which Python doesn't recognize. So if we also try naming it with a symbol in front, like 1 and then variable equals 5, we can see that if we run it, we can see that it will also have a syntax error. So when you name variables, you have to be careful with your name, and it's just best to name it something simple so you can see it and type it easily when you code. Alright, so let's move on. So Python uses dynamic typing, which means that variables can be renamed and reassigned data types, which I just talked about. So it makes Python a flexible language. And in simpler words, it means that we don't have to basically write what data type we want our variable to be. So as you can see here, we have the variable item, which is the string vegetable, okay? And then if we want to rename the variable or change the variable, all we have to do in the next line of code or in some line after item equals vegetable, we can just name it item equals 42, and now the variable in all the lines after we rename it, the variable is 42. So let's demonstrate that here. So if we were to have the variable x equals 5, and then we print x, and then we do x equals 10, and then we print x again, let's see what happens. So as you can see, x is 5 here, and then we rename x to be 10. So as you can see, I run it, and it just prints out x, which is originally 5, and then we rename the variable after, and we print it again, and it's 10. So that's just what dynamic typing is. All right. So here are some examples of declaring variables. As you can see, paid equals 19, that's an integer. Change equals 0.67, that's a floating point value. Did pay equals true, that's a Boolean value. And message equals thank you for your order, that's a string. It's pretty simple. All right, so when it comes to printing variables, I showed it already, but you just name your variable and then you can print your variable. And notice how you can only print it after your variable is defined. So if you print your variable, try to print your variable before you define it, let's say you print x, and then we name x equals 5, it won't work. And this is because when we try to print it, x is not defined. Like I said earlier, it's dynamic typing and it always goes from top to bottom. Python reads your code from top to bottom. So if you were to print or do something with your variable before you define it, it won't work. So you have to define the variable before you do something with that variable, such as print it. Okay. And also you can concatenate variables together by combining variables or string or variable or integer plus variable. Just have to combine it with a plus sign. So let's demonstrate that here. So we do print, and then we can do hi, my name is, and then we do space, and then let's define our variables. Name equals Ethan, and then age, I'm 14, so let me put this in the quotation marks. And then we can do age 14. Let's put that as a string, and then plus name. I'm gonna make this lowercase. Okay, so name, and then plus, and then we can do another string. And my age is space, and then plus age. So let's see what happens when we print this out. As you can see, it prints, hi, my name is Ethan, and my age is 14. So that's how you concatenate variables and other data types together in Python. All right, so we have a quick quiz here. So what would be the output if I ran this code? So let's look at this code. Paid equals 19, change equals 0.67, did pay equals true, and message equals thank you for your order. So these are the 4 variables we defined earlier as well, but it's defined in this code here. And now we're printing paid, change, and message. And notice how we have 3 print statements in 3 different lines. So it's going to print in 3 different lines. And if we look here, B is the only one where it prints in 3 different lines. And it prints these 3 variables, paid, change, and message. So B must be the correct answer. So let's check if we're right. Yup, so we can see that B is the right answer here. All right. So checking data types in Python. So if you don't know what data type you have and you want to know what it is, you can simply just print out the type. And to do this, you just do type inside the parentheses. You want to see whatever you want to check the data type is. You want to put inside those parentheses. It could be a variable, but it could also just be a simple string, number, integer, or float. But as you can see here, we define paid equals 19, and then we check the type of paid by doing type in parentheses paid, and then we print that out. And as you can see, this is what's going to be printed. It's going to be print class int because 19 is an integer. So let's test this out. So say x equals 789.123. So let's print the type, which is going to be float, I think. So let's check it. Yep, it's float. And notice how it has decimal points. So it's a float value. All right. So typecasting is basically just converting one piece of data to another. So data type converting. And if I wanted to convert a string to an integer, you just have to put str, like the abbreviation we went over earlier, in front of your variable. So as you can see here, we have the variable num equals 5. And then we're going to print the type of num, right? Type. And it's going to be an integer because 5 is an integer here. And then here we're redefining the variable, okay? So we have num equals str num. So str is a function to convert whatever you put in the parentheses, it's called the argument, into a string. So if we do this, it'll print, and we print the type of num after we change the type, it'll become a string because we do str in front of it. Okay, so let's test this out, and let's say, well, I'm going to show you that you can't always convert it because it has to make sense, right? So let's say I had the string word equals hello, and I wanted to convert this to an integer. All right, so first of all, let's check the type. Type word, it's a string. So we can check if it's a string, str. And now let's do word equals int word. Okay, and then let's try to print it out. Let's just try to print word out and see what happens. As you can see, we get an error, value error, invalid literal for int with base 10 because hello is not a base 10 integer. It's not a number. So if you think about it, it's like an invalid argument. Word is not going to be able to be converted to an integer in the int function because if you think about it, hello is basically not, you can't convert hello to a number, right? All right, let's move on. Now here's another example. This is just converting a string to an integer. Here you can see that the string 5 is convertible because 5 is an integer, right? So you can convert it to an integer. All right. And that's it. So thank you guys for watching, and yeah.